Good evening, parents and carers and community members and those joining us this evening. Welcome to our first webinar of the Trinity series. I truly hope you are well and you are enjoying this fantastic sunshine. So our speaker this evening is a well-known member of the Forest community, and we're fortunate to have access to all of the Wellbeing Hub and their fantastic resources. But before I introduce our well-known, I would say, face of the family forest, I'll come back to that. But first of all, I just want to remind you that our next webinar is when parents worry too much, and that's managing parental anxiety, and that's led by Anita, who you would have seen last term, and she's a fantastic parenting expert. So please do join us on Thursday, the 7th of May. So before I introduce Alicia this evening and welcome her back, we have got some videos to show this evening. If we're just having a few technical difficulties with them, we're hoping they work. If they don't, then we'll ensure that you have access to them at a later date, or Alicia will come back at some point and we'll make sure we weave them into future webinars. So if you don't know much about Alicia, she is passionate about providing evidence-based advice to parents, teachers, and those looking after children and young people, so they can be proactive in supporting the mental health and well-being of those in their care. She works directly with children and young people, empowering them to look after their mental health and well-being. And she draws on the latest research from psychotherapy, psychology, neuroscience, and along with her experience of a long time now of working as an adolescent therapist. Alicia is a BACP accredited therapist, parenting parenting expert, sought after keynote speaker, and a member of the all-party parliamentary group for Fit and Healthy Childhood. And with all of that, she's also an author and a mother. And every time I meet Alicia, she always asks how I am. And really, I just want to say, how are you? She's navigating so much, and she's always putting her effort into other people, such as ourselves this evening. She's regularly sought for her expert opinion, the reason we have her here again this evening, by media, and she's having worked with schools across the UK for more than a decade, delivering webinars, talks and workshops to parents and carers. She also created the Wellbeing Hub in 2020, and it's an award-winning platform that we're very, very happy to be part of. And they have a whole school proactive approach to supporting the mental health of well-being of young people. And every time I do this introduction, she tells me every time the numbers are growing. So I'm not even going to say a number. Last, it was impacting over 100,000 pupils, and I'm sure it's many more to date. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome Alicia, and hopefully we'll get those videos sorted for you.
Thanks, Natasha. Yeah, we're up to 170,000 now, so it's a bit bonkers, isn't it? But there you go. It's really lovely to be with you all at Forest again. And yeah, I think the videos will come through now because they're, well, hopefully it'll all work out on the night, as they say. So we are talking about creating cultures of success, and it's really, really important because we all want our kids to be successful in whatever area it is they decide to go for. But before we get going, there are 3 quick questions that I'd really love to ask you. And I would really encourage you to be honest with yourself, actually, because the more honest you are, the more you're going to get out of this talk. So the 3 questions are these. When you look at your child's report, which grade do you notice first? An achievement grade or the effort grade? When you pick your child up after a sports match, what do you ask first? Did you win? A. Or did you have fun? B. And last question is, do you ask your child how their friends did in tests and exams? There you go. Those are the 3 questions. And if you'll just jot down A's and B's, and then we'll come back to them a bit later. So the title for this talk was Setting Up for Success. And I guess we need to have a think about what success actually means to all of us. You know, is it about money and status and power? Is it about love, happiness, fulfillment? Is it simply about looking forward to doing whatever you do on a Monday morning? the chances are that we're all going to have a slightly different idea about it. So how will you know if you have been successful as a parent? What would success look like for your children? Would it perhaps be different for each of them? Maybe if you've got one who's really academically able, you are a little bit more ambitious for them than the one who perhaps struggles a little bit. Or maybe with them, you just kind of want them to be happy. Success means really different things to different people. And the definition I've always liked best is this one from Maya Angelou. Success is liking yourself, liking what you do, and liking how you do it. And for me, I think she puts it so succinctly, but it's also, I think she does more than that, because I think it really encapsulates what I see as our role as parents, to help our children to like themselves, to help them to find a life that is meaningful for them, and to teach them how to live that life with integrity. And, most important is that first one, to help them to like themselves, because if we don't like ourselves, why would we expect others to? And that has all kinds of implications. I'm not talking about the kind of the big I am. I'm talking about how we help them to have healthy self-esteem, because people who have healthy self-esteem are more robust, they're more resilient, they're more positive, they're more hopeful, they're more likely to reach their full potential to be successful. Or hold it there, go back a bit, to be successful. And so that we're talking about self-esteem. And self-esteem, if you're wondering about your self-esteem, it's that little voice in your head. We all have one that chatters away, and some of us have ones that are really kind and nice, and others have ones that are more punitive. But that internal dialogue, as we call it, is very much connected to our sense of self-esteem. So if you ever hear your children putting themselves down, just challenge them. Because what we want is for them to develop that inner coach rather than that inner critic. Second on her list was liking what you do. And as parents, our job is to create opportunities for our children to experiment, to explore, to find the things which spark joy and interest and passion. Number 3, as parents, was to help our children to like how they do things. And I think that whether you like how you do things really, really depends on the environment that we create for them. Now, maybe you don't believe that environment plays much part in determining success. But if we go to that kind of idea of nature and nurture, think about, where do you sit on that nature-nurture continuum? Are you sitting in the nature camp, the nurture camp, or perhaps somewhere in between? There's been plenty of research into it, and actually particularly in the world of sport. So if I told you that research shows, this is research working with young Olympians, actually shows that very, very few young Olympians were considered great as children. Would that change where you put yourself on that scale between nature and nurture, inherited or acquired? Let's just have a look at 2 little examples. So the first one, I know Natasha just played that video, so maybe it will work now. Let's give it a go. Can you make that work?
Oh my goodness! Go, buddy! Go, buddy! Run! Push through! Woo! Go up! Woo!
stop that. So basically, if you looked at that first one and you've got that really big child, you could say, well, actually, he's big for his age. That's what's giving him the advantage. That could be nature. That could be nurture. I first saw this actually when I was doing a conference and I was talking. It was the guy who was the head of coaching for the FA, and then he moved on to Rugby England. And he said, which one would you take, Alicia? And actually, it definitely wasn't the big one. I said, well, apart from the fact, if you look, there were some girls on that pitch, which I thought was pretty courageous, given the circumstances. The one I probably would have picked was this one. Now, I don't know anything about rugby, but if you watched him, this kid goes in below the waist, shoulder first, so he's already got a fair bit of skill. He's definitely got the courage, i.e. the nature, and they can see the potential to develop his skills, the nurture. They wouldn't take the big guy, wouldn't even look at him actually. Why? Well, because he doesn't even look like he might pass the ball, so he's not a team player. When everybody else grows, that size might not be such an advantage. Eventually, other teams will work out strategies to take him out. What makes me laugh about that video in particular is the fact that actually, obviously, it's his mum behind the camera. Anyway, let's not go there. So there you've got definitely mostly nature, perhaps a bit of nurture. If we're looking at the nurture, we've already seen it very slightly. Where do you think this cat was brought up? Well, there you go. The answer's popped up already, but have a go, Natasha. He's brought up in a dressage yard. Slightly lost the effect there, but don't worry about it. I think often it's nature that makes us excel as children, and that might have a lot to do with something called the relative age effect. So have a think about when you were born. So if you were born between June and say the end of September, that puts you in group A. If you were born between September and the end of November, that would put you in group B. And I'm sure if we were all sitting in a room together, you're all people of a certain age, but I wouldn't be able to tell you whether you were, just by looking around the room, I wouldn't be able to tell which of you were born in the first half of the year and which half of you were born in the second half of the year, even if you were all born in exactly the same year. But that's, it's just how it is, isn't it? But if you scroll back to the first year of life, the relative age effect means that actually this little trio here are going to end up in the same year group as these two 11 months old. And I think it's a really powerful picture to look at because it shows a very obvious difference in maturity, physicality. By the age of 5, it might not be quite so obvious, but it is definitely still there. And the research shows that being born at the beginning of the academic year, beginning of the year, is an advantage. You're better able to focus, you're better coordination, you're more likely to be picked to perform, so you then get more coaching. If you're interested in all of this, there's a great book by Malcolm Gladwell called Outliers. But I think this picture here just makes it super obvious. In the classroom, the jury is out as to when the relative age effect is no longer relevant. Some say it's eradicated by year 8, others that it can be seen right the way up to university level. On the sports pitches, you can see the relative age effect at all levels up to professional teams. But interestingly, it is completely reversed at the elite athlete level. Why? Well, I think there's probably lots of different reasons. But if you think about it, the older ones are not used to having to fight very hard for their success because this age, the maturity gives them the advantage. The disadvantage, they can rely on those natural gifts, i.e. their size, their maturity. They get more opportunities. Whereas if you look at the younger ones, they're used to being the underdog. Therefore, they are more determined because they can't rely on those natural gifts to carry them through. They have to develop their talents. They have to put in a lot of effort. And I think the final reason that those late birthdays, all the disadvantages that come with it, you've got to have real passion. They've got to have real passion for what they're doing to keep going. So they tend to be quite tough. So we need to be mindful that the setting up for success is being mindful that we are realistic about our expectations given their level of maturity. We've also got to be really careful of the messages that we give them about themselves. So I just invite you to take a minute to think, if you were going to introduce your child to me or to anybody else you didn't know, what, say, 3 adjectives would you use? What word would you use to describe your child or your children? I don't know if you can use the chat, but if you can, feel free to add something into the chat box. I'll just keep going anyway, it's all fine. It's a really interesting exercise to do this one for reasons that we will now explore, but interesting to think about what came up for you. You know, if you've got more than one child, did you find it much easier to find a word for one child than for another child? Were you sitting there sort of thinking, oh gosh, the first words that popped into my head were a bit negative, I better not put those down, that's not going to look too good. It's really, really fascinating. And I think it's fascinating because actually when we, and I've set you up for a fall really, because I've asked you if you had to attach a label to your children, what label would you attach? And of course, you know, depending on whether you had a great day with them or not, or what mood everybody's in, whether you might, you know, we ascribe different names, different words at different times, depending on our mood, their mood, all kinds of things that are happening. But when we label children, we can develop what we call limiting beliefs, because those words get internalized. So I'll give you an example. For me, when I was at school, which is a long time ago now, we used to do O-levels, and I quite liked art, but Miss Dittmar wrote in the report before I was choosing, on the basis that Alicia cannot draw a straight line, I do not think art is going to be for her. She is not artistic. And I was like, oh, such a shock. And I thought, oh, so I abandoned anything remotely creative for years and years and years. And it wasn't until about probably 10 years later when I found myself creating the Roman Forum on the 11th deck of a ship off the coast of Civitavecchia in Italy, that I thought, you know what, Miss Dittmar, I might not have been able to draw and paint as you wanted me to, but I am creative. And I still can't draw a straight line, by the way. So when we give people these kind of labels, they tend to swallow them whole, and many of us don't really reassess that stuff for years until perhaps we're adults and it's no longer working for us. I think we have to be particularly careful that we don't give them labels, especially when they're going through adolescence, because at that point they're programmed to test personal boundaries, to experimenting with their identity. And actually, do you know what? I don't think that's ever been more difficult because of social media. You know, it must be like being dumped off at the biggest Tesco depot you've ever found and told to go and find one packet of biscuits without getting derailed along the way. So if we want them to have a helpful inner dialogue, if we don't, you know, if we want them not to have those limiting beliefs, we need to avoid labeling them. And instead, we want to separate the action from the person. So rather than he's sporty, he really enjoys his sport. Apart from she's sporty, she loves netball or whatever it is. Can you hear how you just separate the action from the person? I don't like labels, but I think knowing which ones we use can be really helpful because it gives us clues as to what messages our children are getting about them from us. So if you're co-parenting and only one of you is watching this, the invitation is to get your other half to do this exercise as well, because it gives us really good clues as to what we are likely to pay attention to. So there you go. The way we talk to our children becomes that inner voice. It gives us clues as to what we are likely to pay attention to. And this is really comes back to the law of attraction. The law of attraction is the idea that what we notice is what we get more of. It's also the Hebbian law, if you want the science part. The neurons that fire together eventually wire together. But I think it also helps us just being aware to be mindful of when we might run the risk of becoming over-involved, putting too much pressure on our kids. And too much pressure has been identified as one of the factors driving the rates of mental ill health among young people. So if we're going to set them up for success, we've got to be aware of the part that we play. We've also got to be aware of the culture that we create. And there are two cultures. There is one called a process goal culture, and the other one is called an end goal culture. And they come from the world of sports coaching, but they apply to anybody who's really trying to help anybody else to be the best that they can. So let's compare the effects of the two cultures. So if you answered the questions at the beginning, those A's and B's, if you answered them predominantly with A's, i.e. that focus was on achievement, you asked if they won, you asked how their friends did, you looked at the grade rather than the effort, then the chances are you are going to create what is known as an end goal culture. And the end goal focuses on results, grades, prizes, winning, being the best. And if that is the focus, then actually we end up focusing on the performance of others rather than on our own. So we compare ourselves to others, often unfavorably. I would say you can compare yourselves to others, but it's a no-win game, because if you think you're ahead, then you're under pressure to stay there. If you think you're behind, you're just going to feel miserable. And that's the same for things like social media as well, actually. If the focus is on that end goal, the cups, the winning, the prizes, then not being the best or winning can be failing. That's the extreme view. If I'm not the best, I'm a failure. So the end goal culture develops what we would call extrinsic motivation. So that means that we are motivated by things external to us, the prizes, the status, the results, the cups, blah, 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 blah. Or the opinion of others, and we end up having to, so that comes back again, doesn't it, to that idea of labels. We can end up trying to live up to our labels, because that's what we notice our parents value in us, rather than because it makes us feel good. So the end goal culture, the pressure to win or to be better than others, can end up killing the fun. And that's because there's just so much pressure to win or to be better that it kills the joy. And the last thing that it can do is actually two more, but it can really develop a fear of failure. If you can only be okay when you hit that end goal, then it's very easy to fear failing. Lastly, the end goal culture engenders feelings of inferiority, because it's really hard. If you're always comparing yourself to others, and if that's all of the things that the end goal culture creates, it's really hard to fulfill your potential if you fear failure, if you view others as a threat, if you don't really enjoy the journey because the pressure to perform feels too intense. And it's very hard to keep moving forwards if your sense of self is so fragile. So let's have a look at the alternative, which is the process goal culture. Now, in the process goal culture, the message that is communicated is that it's all about putting in your best effort, improving your skills, collaborating with others, and enjoyment. And in the process goal culture, the message is that success will come if we focus on the journey. All our goal is to try and be a little bit better than we did yesterday or the last time we did this. The emphasis is on improving our own performance. So by all means, keep an eye on what others are doing, but only because you might learn something from them, you might be inspired by them. And if that's our goal, others are not threatening. So we become our own benchmark. In the end goal culture, we feel successful when we more often, because in the end goal culture, we can only feel successful when we achieve that end goal. Whereas in this culture, we can feel successful when we see ourselves improve, when we learn something new, when we give maximum effort. And of course, all of that is going to lead to a greater sense of happiness and enjoyment, and it will develop that intrinsic motivation. So intrinsic motivation is just doing something because it feels good. And if we're only trying to be a bit better than we were yesterday, we are very unlikely to feel like we've failed very often, so we don't get that fear of failure. And if you're only comparing yourself to yourself, you can't feel inferior. Why is that also important? Well, the end goal culture puts people under enormous pressure to achieve, and a pressure to achieve has been identified, as I've already said, as a significant contributor to mental ill health within children and adolescents. It drives perfectionism. You won't work with somebody with, for example, anorexia nervosa who doesn't also have perfectionist tendencies. And last but not least, that culture of success will determine their mindset. And their mindset is a major factor in determining their success in all areas of life. So if you haven't come across the theory of mindset, it's originally the work of Professor Carol Dweck out at Stanford University. If you look, there's hundreds of books on mindset, but if I was you, I'd buy hers because she is the leading light in the field of research, and it is just called Mindset. But I really like this image. The little boxes here in the fixed mindset remind me of what happens when we label people. We trap them. You are the sportsman, you are the artist, you are the kind one, you are the fussy one. We trap them in this false kind of box. So what is a mindset? It's simply a belief about yourself and your most fundamental qualities like your IQ, your beliefs, your talents, your personality. So people with fixed mindsets believe that those fundamental qualities are essentially stable or fixed, i.e. they don't really change much over time. So that would be the very much down the nurture end of our continuum. People with growth mindsets believe that our fundamental qualities are growable, i.e. they can flourish in some circumstances and they can wither in others. If we believe that our talents and intelligence, etc., are fixed, e.g. our labels, the clever one, the sporty one, etc., we will do pretty much anything to live up to them. Because if we don't, we might lose the approval of the significant adults in our lives. And people will go to really extreme lengths not to fall short, such as cheating in tests and exams, the ones that always have to be the first to finish everything, never being able to admit that they're wrong, blaming everything but themselves when things gone wrong. you're old enough to remember John McEnroe, tennis player. It was the ball, it was the seagull, it was the net, it was the light, it was the heat, it was my trousers, you name it. There was always an excuse that if he didn't win. So if we're terrified of failing, we end up avoiding challenges. And when an obstacle comes along, we give up rather than risk not being able to overcome it. If our talents are fixed, why would we need to put in effort to improve? In fact, having to put in effort suggests that perhaps you're not talented in the first place. If we have a fixed mindset, feedback becomes really, really difficult to hear because it sounds like criticism. It implies a lack of talent. If I don't have my talent, I'm nothing. I'm a failure. And with a fixed mindset, other people being successful feels really, really threatening. If they're better than me, I am nothing. Therefore, with people with a fixed mindset often plateau early and they often don't achieve their full potential. So you can generally pretty easily get through GCSEs with a fixed mindset, but it's going to come much, much more challenging as you go through A levels and into further education and jobs and all the rest of it, because you've got to be able to collaborate, communicate, you've got to be able to share ideas, debate. And if you've got a fixed mindset, those things can be really, really difficult. So they often, as I say, plateau early. With a growth mindset, challenges and obstacles are opportunities to improve. We tend to tackle them with relish. If our intelligence and talent can grow, then it's really worth putting in effort to learn new skills. If our focus is on growth, then actually feedback becomes an opportunity to increase our understanding of what we could do to improve our performance and our skills. If we have a growth mindset, the success of others, as I've already said, gives us useful information and inspiration. If somebody else can do this, then perhaps I can do it too. You know, Andy Murray or Djokovic or Senna or any of the big tennis players wanted to improve, they're not going to want to play against me. I can play tennis, but not in anything that was going to give them some kind of competition that will allow them to grow. So without opposition or competition, people are not challenged. And if I'm not challenged, ultimately my brain is not going to grow. So all of those things, with a growth mindset, we don't feel threatened by the success of others. We don't avoid challenges. We believe we can achieve if we take it one step at a time. Where we focus our attention as parents is going to determine whether they develop a fixed or a growth mindset. If we focus on those end results, the labels, the prizes, the results, they get a fixed mindset. If we focus on the journey, all you have to do is be a bit better than you were yesterday, they end up with a growth mindset. So focus your attention on the process rather than the outcome. Praise them, or yourself for that matter, for the effort, the persistence, the teamwork, the focus. When we notice the small steps to victory and celebrate them, they are more likely to like the way they do things. The more they enjoy, the more they do, the better they become. Now, I'm not naive enough to stand up here and say that results don't matter. They do, but only really because they open doors. But really, really try not to focus on the results. I had an 11-year-old who came in extreme anxiety, and she was with her mum, and she said, I don't know what's wrong with her. She's very bright and she's doing, she does brilliantly at school, and we really don't put any pressure on it at all. And then it came out that 2 weeks before, they'd had a long weekend and they'd taken her to Oxford and Cambridge, aged 11, and told her that was where she was going to university. I think you get my drift. So by all means, have really high expectations for yourselves and for your children, because let's face it, you are all capable of incredible things. But I think we give ourselves the best chance of achieving our goals if we focus on the journey. What do I need to do today, every single day, to move myself a little bit further towards that long-term goal? We don't want them to fear failure, because then you can't be, well, think about James Dyson. James Dyson made 5,127 prototypes of the bagless Hoover before he actually got it right. If he'd feared failure, we would not have the bagless Hoover. And I don't know about you, but I really, really like mine. Now, from time to time, they will hit an obstacle. They will feel stuck. But actually, the message is that these are real opportunities for reflection and for growth. So try hard not to fix it for them. We can do lots of empathy. We can, it's really horrible when you feel stuck or you've got yourself in a muddle. I believe that you can do this. Learning is a process that requires struggle. So when it feels hard, it means that they're growing, they're building their resilience. Because when we learn, we have to move from this left-hand side of the graph where we are consciously incompetent through consciously incompetent to consciously competent until eventually we hit the goal of becoming unconsciously competent. And you can demonstrate it to them. When you were this age, you couldn't do the alphabet, you couldn't do your 3 times table. Now you don't even think about it. If I asked you 6 twos, you wouldn't have to do, there was no hard work involved at all. But we have to go through the bottom of that curve. And it's a tough journey. But I think when students feel safe and supported, they can tolerate the struggle. They can sit in the discomfort at the bottom of that curve. They can take the risks that will help them to climb out of the curve because they trust that the environment will catch them if they fall. So lots of empathy, but then really encouraging them. I'm here, I'm alongside you. I can help you with the process, maybe breaking it down into little chunks, or maybe we need to go back over something. You haven't got it yet, magic word yet, but you can do this. I believe in you. Get them to fix it for themselves, because we're giving them the space to grow, to experiment, to make some intelligent mistakes. And that's really important because, as I've said, we don't want them developing a fear of failure, not least because it kills creativity. And creativity is at the heart of all great literature, art, music, but it also, we have to be creative to solve problems in maths, science, engineering, architecture. Without creativity, nothing that currently exists would exist. So this study was done by a guy called Edward Lund, who's an American psychologist and systems analyst. And he was looking at people that could be considered highly creative by age. And you can see it drops from 98% of 5-year-olds can be considered to be highly creative, right the way down to 2% of all adults. And that's a problem, because if you look at the job markets of the future, particularly with things like AI, there are 4 qualities that your kids are going to need in spades. Number 1 is social skills. Number 2 is creativity. Number 3 is initiative. Number 4 is critical thinking. And if you think about those, creativity and initiative will get crushed if we have an end goal culture. So, really kind of encouraging curiosity and encouraging creativity. On the Wellbeing Hub, you will find a section called Talking Points, which is philosophy and ethics. Philosophy and ethics are absolutely brilliant because they don't have right or wrong answers. So that, they're debate, aren't they? And we really build all of those skills, which are just fantastic, what we're going to need, but they're also brilliant for our mental health and well-being, because it's about critical thinking, creativity, it's about communication, empathy, turn taking, you name it. So my invitation is that you go and get your child, your young person, to choose one of the talking points from the Wellbeing Hub and sit and have a bit of a debate about it over the next meal that you spend together. I think we're getting to the end now, but let's put aside our fears that they might fail. I know J.K. Rowling seems to be a bit out of, cancelled at the moment, which is a shame considering most of the things that she's ever done. But one thing she does say, and she was talking to the Harvard alumni about the fringe benefits of failure, and she says it's impossible to live without failing at something unless you live so cautiously that you might as well not have lived at all, in which case you fail by default. So let's just put aside our fears that they might fail, and let's believe that every single one of our children, given the right culture, the right encouragement, has the potential to fly. We need to give them the permission to succeed without the pressure to succeed. And we need to remember that at the end of the day, the only person who is going to be living their lives is them. And that might not be what you had envisaged, but it makes it no less valuable. One of my daughters finished school, did her art foundation, went to Loughborough to do fine art, rang me up a couple of weeks in, said, "Mum, I absolutely hate it. I'm in the wrong uni at the wrong time, doing the wrong course." She'd also happened to fall in love that holidays. So I said, "Okay, that's fine. What are you going to do about it?" And she said, "Well, I'll do a month, because actually you can do a month without losing your student grant. And I'll try everything, but I really don't think this is going to work out." So I said, "That's fine. You've got to come back with a plan B." We got to the end of the month. I found myself driving to Loughborough to pick her up. And she came back and she went off and trained as an outdoor instructor. She spent 2-3 years doing that. Crazy stuff. And then she said, "Right, now I'm ready to go to university." And she went to university. She came out with a first in child and youth development psychology, ka-ching. And she is now happily married to the man she met in that holiday. They have toured the world. She's worked for me for the last 5-6 years, and she's an absolute superstar. And now she's decided she's going back to university to do a master's in psychotherapy. So the journey they take, as I say, might well not be the one that you've planned out for them, but please don't ever think it's going to be less valuable for all of that. So just like plants, if we can give them the right conditions, they will thrive. Our job is to create those conditions and to recognize that the strongest and most beautiful plants are not necessarily always quite the tidiest. So we've come to the end. I'm putting the little QR code there just for any of you who haven't already registered with the Wellbeing Hub. It's there, it's free, there's amazing resources that anybody can use. But if anybody has any questions, now's your time. Okay. Well, it's absolutely lovely to be with you all, and I wish you all a happy evening and a lovely weekend. Let's hope the sun shines for the bank holiday. You all take care, and hopefully I'll see you all soon. Bye. Thanks, Natasha, for hosting.